I am Corporal Krische, and I'm a squad leader in 0311 with Bravo Company, 1st Battalion, 8th Marines. So our tasking was pretty much to be on standby, just as a 911 force for wherever we may go. We got to train with the Brits a little bit, well, more or less just us in the UK, over in the southern UK, just do some Wi-Fi ranges and some patrolling and just stuff like that. Besides that, it was just live up ports, some floating time in the Med, then over to CENTCOM in that region. So we were at Air Base in Kuwait, and I had just got off of a guard shift with the Air Force because we were doing rotating posts. And I'd gotten a call from my father asking me about, like, hey, are you going to Afghanistan? And I'm like, no, I have no idea what you're talking about. And then my buddy and I went to the chow hall to go grab something to drink after our shift. And on the TV, up of the vending machines, there was the State Department releasing the post about the sending forces into Afghanistan. There was a period of time on the boat where we thought we were getting tasked out to like fly for the ship to Kuwait to go right to Afghanistan, but that turned out to be like a quick stand down. Not really sure what that was. I wasn't really in the loop for that. But when we were getting ready to go, there wasn't really like a whole lot of understanding, just that we were going there and that the Taliban was closing in on Kabul, and then we were beginning to collapse our stand in the country, and then from there do an evacuation. At the time, I was with Alpha Company, 2nd Platoon, and we were on the first plane in of Marines from 1-8, and we were told, hey, you might need to run to the closest piece of cover. You know, we weren't really sure what we were rolling into, but once we got on the ground, it was, got off the plane with our nods on, and there was a bus that picked us up to take us over to the terminal. When we got there, it was very like confusing because we weren't expecting like a very calm appearance when we got there. So we were in a single file line once we got off the bus going up to the terminal, and believe it or not, I saw my uncle, Colonel Krische, who was a chaplain with the U.S. Army, greeting everybody as we were walking up. So he had come to visit me just before his he's been to the Middle East several times on deployments for, chaplain work and stuff. So I knew he was going, and I saw him a couple months prior before he went on his deployment. So I knew he was there, but as far as I knew, he was at the embassy. So when I walked up, I kind of saw him, and I was, more professional. I was like, hey, Colonel Krische, what's going on? He goes, hey, how's it going, man? And I'm like, how you been? And he's like, do I know you? And the darkness was to my face, so he couldn't see me, but the light was facing him. So I popped my Kevlar up, and I'm like, hey, Uncle Jim, it's me, man. So he was like, oh, what are you doing here? When we first got there, I'm going to backtrack a little bit. So once we got off, we kind of got a brief in the jock, just kind of like the general layout, hey, what's happening inside the city? And they showed us some footage and went over some plans of stuff. They went over this thing called the Alamo plan, which was, hey, if for whatever reason the Taliban gets here, they start overrunning the airbase, pretty much everybody comes back to the jock and we do a final stand. But after that, it was just wake up, hygiene, just wait for word for the day, just get some familiarity, some Witters recon stuff, get familiar with the airport. So I had just gone to bed, probably been asleep for 45 minutes, and my platoon sergeant came into the room and pretty much kicked the door open, and he said, hey, get your stuff on, get outside, let's go, right now. And we come running out of our compound into the open courtyard in the center between where we were staying and where Bravo Company was going to be once they got there. And, there was just gunfire. You could hear helicopters flying. There was flares going off. And the airport itself was probably 100 meters from us on an offset, between another compound. So you could hear people yelling and stuff. And once that had happened, we got our counts, and the CO walked in and he kind of said, hey, I need 78 killers, get out on the runway and, do God's work and stuff. So we go out the compound and load into the back of Bears, which was a military troop carrier. And we went out onto the airstrip and we unloaded. And at that point, we saw the whole mass of people on the runway. I had gotten off the truck and I was looking around and I'm like, what is going on? And the first thing that clicked in my head was, okay, there's a lot of people here. There's a lot of people with baggage and luggage and all different sorts of stuff. And like, what are we walking into? Like, the last thing we knew is that the Taliban had overtaken a C-17 on the runway, but we got there and it was just a bunch of people trying to climb into in the back of the airplane. So from there, our platoon and the rest of the company that was out there kind of got online to get ready to push back the waves of people that were just massed in the center of the airfield. No, so the only thing that we saw were civilians and just, some military age males, but there was like nothing that like stood out that was like, okay, this is definitely a threat. It was like there was nothing breaking the baseline of anybody there. It was just looked like normal people. That whole incident with the runway was probably about 36 to about 42 hours. So probably after that, we got pushed to the gates to start doing security detail. We got to backtrack a little bit. So prior to the push on the airfield, my platoon had been tasked out with going to work with the 10th Mountain, and we went into the JOC, conversed with them a little bit, and we were on QRF for what was called Task Force Polar Bear. And from there, the Army took some contact a little ways out, one of the gates, and we had pushed out and we occupied the berm gate. First squad from my platoon was up on the berm, and then second squad, which is where I was kind of behind some Alaska barriers, just kind of waiting to rip out. And that's when first squad kind of took some sniper fire, just one shot. But besides that, it was very uneventful. I had worked the North Gate about most of the time. There was, I believe it was the East Gate that we were at. There was kind of like about a 24 to 48 hour period that we were out there. And it was just kind of standing around, just watching a homemade village that the people that were waiting to get vetted had made. So it was just kind of just standing in a Connex box area, just watching them. When we had gone out to the North Gate the first time, we got told that there's an entrance gate and then the exit gate, which was a turnstile, which had about a secondary gate to it to prevent like more or less like a backstop to keep people from flooding in through one gate. So when I initially got there, the Germans were there, already holding a post. So we were kind of on the backside watching for any vehicles that might have broken through and come through, or anybody that might be jumping the wall. But once we got up to the actual gate itself, it was open, and there was more or less like a perimeter of 180 C wire going out about probably 20 meters from the road. And it was just clothes torn in the sea wire, socks, belongings, people just begging to be let in, and it was very chaotic. At the gate, it was more or less just kind of watching, looking for anything out of the ordinary on my part. Our duty there was to more or less be a security detail, make sure that nobody breaks through that perimeter while they're allowing people in to be vetted through the State Department. So it was just more or less kind of a watch game and just wait for further tasking at that point. Yes. So it was, from what I understand, it was the Afghan Special Forces guys. The ANA had abandoned their posts probably about 24 hours after the push of the runway, if I remember correctly. So the Afghan Special Forces guys had stayed, and they worked very closely with us. Like if we needed help with something, like, or maybe interpreting, like they would come out and talk. But they were a huge help while we were out there. They were wearing kind of like a multicam, their own personal uniform with some patches on them. Some of them had their own custom patches. Like one of them said Taliban bounty hunter on it, which is pretty funny. So they could have been, like the ones that were outside the wire, like corralling people and beating people probably 5-10 meters outside the wire. With what had gone on the past 20 years, just kind of walking out there and going from, knowing that we had been fighting these guys for the last 20 years, and now going from, hey, we need to not show any hostility toward these guys and kind of coincide with each other, but not directly, but like in order to get this mission done. It was a little bit of like, how do I know, right? Like, because we knew that there was a threat of ISIS out there. There was, and then there's Taliban out there. Like, you don't know necessarily the difference because obviously I'd never been there before. So it was more or less kind of like an on edge type of thing where it was like, okay, who is who? We weren't really briefed on a capability or limitation. We just knew that the Taliban was within 200 miles of Kabul by the time we got there. And within those 2 days, the Taliban was within probably 20 miles. It was a lot of people begging to be let in, and families and people like looking for their families. The one thing, once we started having to use non-lethal, the one thing that stuck out to me was that these people were somehow immune to OC spray because it seemed like it did not affect them at all when it was obviously needed to be used when they were trying to break through the perimeter. We were out there with non-lethal shotguns, ride shields, batons, flashbangs. I was a grenadier, so I had non-lethal 320 rounds that had to be used at times. So obviously it was a moral and ethical dilemma for me, but I knew there was a job that had to be done, and the job absolutely has to come first in that situation because to me, it's me and my brothers or these people. And as sad as it is to say, like, I need to stand by my brothers and make sure the job gets done. From the time that I was at Northgate, they did have a few technicals parked inside the back perimeter of the Northgate with one having a dish gun mounted on the top. I hadn't seen that used at all. Frankly, I don't think the truck even moved because there was nowhere to put it. But besides that, it was just guys on the line and just the vehicles in reserve. So 10th Mountain had the Bears, which we had utilized for the initial push onto the airfield, which is it was a longer troop carrier, driver, vehicle commander, and about I want to say about 12 seats in the back with a gun turret on top. And then there was a vehicle called a Max Pro, which was probably had 4 seats in the back, driver, vehicle commander, and a turret gunner, which my platoon had gotten to utilize at one point, but not for long. But that was all that I really recalled having besides the JLTVs being used by our forces. So our platoon had gotten designated to do some cat work. So we broke off into fire teams and vehicles. So driver, vehicle commander, and then 2 of us in the back on a 240. And first squad had gone out first, and they got to do more patrols than we did. My squad went out, and probably about 20 minutes after we went out, we got recalled to go back to the gates. So when the whole instance of the runway being overrun, it took us about a good 4 hours to push people back to the civilian side of the tarmac into the terminal. And we stood there all night, doing guard detail. There were people on the actual gates that would let vehicles in onto the tarmac. Like, people were hanging off of those, wanting to be let in. There were people in the planes on the tarmac, like behind the sea wire that we had put up. And morning had finally come, and we were out there with, it was just us and some guys from 10th Mountain. And eventually we got ripped out by another group from 10th Mountain and a small group from 2-1 that hadn't been there at that time. And we had pushed back to the center of the runway where there was a little compound. And I remember us just sitting there waiting for the whole company to get back. And I had laid my head back for a minute because I was so exhausted. And all I hear is somebody yelling to get up. And I look over, and it was like a scene out of World War Z. The civilians had broken through the perimeter, and it was just probably over 10,000 people storming the airfield at this point. From there, we had pushed them back again. And I was in line with a vehicle gate at the front of the terminal. And I remember seeing a lot of commotion toward the back, and there was a little white hut next to this vehicle gate. And eventually, when the gate got opened a little bit, the civilians were fighting to keep it closed, and there was a technical on the other side with about 2 to 4 Taliban ISIS fighters that had gotten off. And I wasn't aware of this at this point until I saw a guy in a green garb and a brown vest hop over with an AK-47. And he had walked onto the patio of the white hut, and he was walking around shooting rounds in the air. And then eventually he had lowered his rifle toward us, and the entire company opened fire on this individual. him showing hostile act and hostile intent. Immediately following that, we had taken pop shots from somewhere in the terminal off to the right, and my instincts just kicked in and just went into RTR and just fired 3 rounds, and it was weird, but I kind of just started going into the prone, and I'm like, what am I doing? But between us and those fighters, there was a sea of civilians. So the main consideration was these people that were also trying to stand up as we were returning fire. It was the civilian consideration in between being like, I can't hit these people. But a notable thing from that experience was right after the contact, there was just, the people were panicked. And one of the guys, his name was, he had stood up and he yelled, let's go Aztec. We don't use civilians as body shields. And we started pushing up, trying to clear the area. So the whole thing was going on. So the Apaches were flying low. People were trying to grab onto the bottoms of the helicopters. And it was blowing people's belongings off. It actually blew some people over. So that was quite a sight. So I was also an AMED. I was helping out Doc Electric at the time. And along with that, also being a grenadier. But there was a lot of prep work that had to go into prior to the people storming the runway. Me, Doc Electric, and one of my other buddies that was also an AMED for First Squad. We were setting up the stretcher and stuff on the UTVs that we had in the compound. And we kind of had a little powwow with Doc. And the most surreal thing to me was him just kind of giving us a talk of like, if one of your boys gets shot, you need to put the personal side of things aside and worry about him, considering maybe your best friend. Because the role of us was, if somebody got injured, one of us would stay back at the gate while Doc and another AMED would ride in the back of the UTV and start working on the patient. As for the grenadier, it was more or less kind of figuring out when I shouldn't use my non-lethal on these people. Never had to use any of my HE, but on the non-lethal side, it was trying to figure out when the best time would be to employ this. For the non-lethal part of it, what I was looking for to engage was people acting with more hostile intent, not armed, but like more handsy, like, trying to go after other people, go after our guys, things like that. Like people that need to be subdued very quickly that may pose a threat. I never didn't necessarily have to render immediate aid to anybody, thankfully. However, I did go into areas where I saw some pretty gruesome injuries as a result of force that had to be taken, or maybe from Taliban forces on the outside of the wall, and that kind of became a burden on us to treat and take care of. So the people that would be kicked out through the exit gate on the side of North Gate, there were times where Taliban would snatch up the people trying to come out, or they would come out and they would start beating them or things like that. So the Taliban were seemingly not fond of the people trying to leave the country, but it didn't become, once they were out of the gate, it was out of our hands. The one that stuck out to me the most was right after the airplane had taken off and the people had fallen off the plane onto the tarmac. We were all just kind of standing there on line, still kind of in a sense of shock with the civilians in front of us. And Lieutenant Colonel Richard Ella, our battalion commander at the time, walked down in front of the company on his own. And the words out of his mouth were, "Let's go Aztec. We got to get these people off the runway," and took the charge right from the front. And without hesitation, the rest of the company followed right in suit and just snapped out of it. While we were there, it was, hey, we got a job to do. Like, there's nothing else that matters right now besides the job that needs to be done. And coming out of it, knowing that we were able to get 130,000 people out of there, it could have been a lot less. And the fact that we did that with 2-1 and the rest of our supporting elements, and it was a good sense of service to what was called upon us. So the platoons were being swapped out by rest cycles. So The other platoon would likely be at the compound, which was probably, if you were running, you'd probably take like 2 minutes to get there. Um, if something was happening up front at the gate, there were people back behind helping route people that were being denied by the State Department. So those people could have came up and reinforced, but an actual element of reserve would have been in the compound. Day that the bombing happened, I was, we had been hearing explosions and stuff the entire time, and I was out back in the smoke pit of the compound, just in my green skivvy shorts and my rifle and a bandana, and I was just sitting there, and I was smoking, and I heard this weird boom and felt like a slight rumble, and I was like, that is weird, and I had gone up onto the tower, which was in the back of our compound, and it was probably about the size of a second story of a building, and I was looking out, I didn't see anything, but what I had seen was vehicles flying toward the direction of the Abbey Gate, and eventually coming back right as the ground attack alarm sounded, and there were injured people in the back, which was a little, it was kind of like, what just happened? So, I wasn't anywhere close to where Abbey Gate was, so I didn't see the immediate effects of the bombing or anything of that sort. I just got a glimpse of casualties being brought back on vehicles. So, we kind of got ripped out and got put on the gate for the rest of the night on the berm, which was overlooking the actual north gate itself with fighting holes. And there was rumor going around that one of the people that we were with was in the bombing, but we didn't know anything about it. It was just speculation. So we're all a little worried, but we didn't know anything at the time yet. So I had met her, our first boat up, when we were doing a PMIT on a FOD walk on the flight deck, and we just talked to people up there, and she was immediately welcoming, as she's like, hey, how you doing, and all that. And I would say, as a person, she was a very down to earth individual, one of the nicest people you will ever meet. And the last thing that she had said to us as our squad was going out onto the north gate that day was go get them, boys. And I actually have that engraved in the back of the bracelet here. So, but her big thing was having a positive mental attitude, and I think having that a lot of the time while we were in that situation throughout the entirety of the evacuation gave a lot. It helped. The big thing that I just held on to was everything that I was trained. I was not one to gaff off training. I love my job. I loved my job at the time. Coming into the Marine Corps to be an infantryman was something that I've wanted to do. And everything that they taught me, I was ready. There was not a single point in time where I thought to myself, am I ready for this? When we were going to the shops prior to, everything happening, I picked up 2 cartons of the Marlboro Double Crushes and stuff. And, the big thing that was a big, boost was, getting cartons of cigarettes and care packages. We were getting Camels. And we're smoking them so much, we were chain smoking constantly that it would get to a point where you would smoke half of it, ash it, and then smoke the rest of it later because you're trying to conserve cigarettes. But besides that, it was really that and just the small naps. People have seen the photos of the guys guarding the tarmac that were sleeping on the ground, just taking your Kevlar off and just laying your head on it and catching 20 minutes was that was something. Best sleep I had. The big thing that I think the people that did it way before us, the GWAT vets that were in, the initial pushes of Marja or Fallujah or, outside of Afghanistan, Iraq, those places, they are the ones who shaped what needed to happen for us to be able to do what we had to do. So what we did was only for 17 days, but what they did was for years, and all the credit goes to them. A lot of the guys in my peer group were like, nothing's going to happen. And, we had been at peacetime for a long time. And, that may be true, but just because it's that way today doesn't mean that the world's going to be the same tomorrow. Anything could happen. prime example was what happened to us. What we knew is we were just sitting in Kuwait just for potentially, maybe, slim chance of doing something. And then just like that, we're in it. So, and the big thing that I would say to them is always be ready. But I know as a junior Marine, you joined to get into the fight, to do that stuff. Like, I would say don't wish for it, but be prepared for it, because it will take a toll and it's not one that you want to live with forever. I remember you asking one of the guys about somebody that they look up to, just as like maybe a role model. Ever since moving over to Bravo Company after the deployment, Sergeant O'Brien, who's one of my fellow squad leaders in my platoon, he built me from the ground up to be a squad leader just fresh out of AIMC that knew absolutely nothing, just the schoolhouse, into being what I am today. And I feel like I owe it to him to have the best squad I possibly can and teach the guys that come in under my charge to be the best that they can be, and so they all can have my spot one day and just be ready for anything.